Welcome to the final lecture in the 2013-2014 1L Convocation Lecture Series. As you know, this lecture series is organized by Dean Arterian and myself. I'm Professor Keith Bybee. And the aim is to bring interesting and distinguished speakers to campus who will be of particular interest and benefit to the 1L class. I'll just remind you of protocol. As you know, since we did this recently, we will make sure to have you on your way by 12:50 so you can make your afternoon classes. After our speaker concludes her talk, she'll talk for about 30 minutes. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A. If you have a question, just please raise your hand and we'll come over to you with a wireless microphone. This will allow the audience to hear your question, the speaker to hear your question, and also for us to capture it on our tape of the event. I also ask that you turn off and silence any mobile devices you have so we don't have any interruptions during the lecture. Today our speaker is Roxana Bacon. The title of her lecture is The True Value of Law School. Ms. Bacon is an immigration practitioner, a policy advisor, and a professor. She is also a former Chief Counsel of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Her career has really been quite an extraordinary and distinguished one. In 1977, Bacon was the first woman partner at Jennings, Strauss & Salmon, which was then the largest firm in Arizona. She was also the first woman to be elected president of the Arizona State Bar and to serve as general counsel of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and its foundation, and of course to serve, as I mentioned, as general counsel to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. She also, along the way, founded her own law firm, which grew from 10 to over 150 people. She has demonstrated a strong commitment to legal education throughout her career. She's endowed immigration law clinics at both of Arizona's law schools, and she's served as a practitioner in residence at several law schools, including Berkeley, Miami, and I believe Texas. There may be some other ones in there too. So she has not only been a very active and high-profile practitioner, but she's also done important service in government and been a teacher. Before I turn over the podium to Ms. Bacon to hear her lecture, Dean Arterian would like to offer an additional personal note of introduction. So please join me in welcoming Dean Arterian.
I've actually threatened Ms. Bacon with taking over her 30 minutes with the personal introduction. There are really two things I want to emphasize. One is that Ms. Bacon, or Roxy as she's known to people who are fortunate enough to know her for 30 years, came out of retirement to accept the appointment to be the general counsel. And when she left in a moment of great courage and public, I want to be careful about the word I use here because it really could be very inflammatory. But she has described her time as general counsel as a year of living dangerously. And when she left, she very publicly took to task the Obama administration and the Congress. And by the Obama administration also taking on the agency for which she was general counsel. And it's very hard to do those things. In fact, they are not done. I mean, I think the Huffington Post article about that described it as just an extraordinary moment of great candor. And I just want to tell you that because I think, in general, my experience with Ms. Bacon is that she really is. I'm going to say this because I'm sort of making a joke, but she's a towering presence. A towering presence on the national level, on the state level, in the classroom. And because she's not going to tell you that, I think it's important that you know it. I will leave aside the many, many embarrassing things I could say about her from having known her so long, only because I know, as we have said many times, that B comes after A, and therefore B gets the last word. Anyway, I am really happy to have the opportunity to have you hear from Roxy Bacon. Thanks.
Okay, first of all, for those of you sitting in the last row, I was a law student too, and I always sat in the last row, preferably right by the door. So I know what you're doing back there. If you want to come up now, that's fine, but I won't call on you, I promise. I just want you to know I feel your pain. I'm going to try to be really careful about getting you out in time to go get coffee and something to eat. So, Dean Arterian, or Hannah, as I know her, I said, look, if you don't make any tall jokes, I won't make any small jokes. She could not resist, right? But I have nothing to say about that, Hannah, nothing to say. She left. Oh, oh wait, I couldn't see you. Yeah. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the introduction. I also have to tell you it's a bit of a jolt to stand here 40 years to the day, almost, that I finished my own law school years, while you little apple-cheeked darlings are just about 3/4 into your first year. You're very, very fortunate. You're on a wonderful and a permanently useful educational ride. I know that in the immediate time frame, you're worried about grades and where you're going to place in the famous grade derby that is law school. And I suspect some of you are worried a little bit too about jobs and how you'll find one in the law. I'm here to tell you it doesn't matter what grades you get, just don't flunk out, and that with patience and imagination, you're going to be fine in the job market too. I'm even going to make those statements in the form of promises, and I have the credentials to make those promises credible because there is nothing traditional about my path. The dean's introduction makes it sound like I always knew just what I wanted and that I was always honed in on success, but nothing could be further from the truth. My story should give you all hope and a lot of optimism. I arrived at UC Berkeley, Boalt Hall School of Law in 1971 on a bet. Literally, I bet a roommate that I could outscore him on the LSAT. It was a $50 wager, and that was a lot of money back then. I only did it because even though I knew he was a lot smarter than I, he wasn't smarter in a way that would make the standardized test graders happy. Being sort of smart is the best level of smartness on a multiple choice exam. If you think too hard, all the questions are a little bit right and a little bit wrong. But if you have a superficial and mostly intuitive intellect, like I do, you just know which one is right enough to please the test maker. So I won the bet. But of course, even back then, if you took the LSAT, you had to designate at least one law school to receive the results. Boalt Hall was a free ride if you were a California resident, so there wasn't any question about where I'd apply. I never gave a single thought to actually getting in. At the time, there were still draft deferments from Vietnam for law students, and that led to a huge number of applicants, more than 3,000 for about 150 spots. So when I did get accepted, it scared me. I was so spooked, I figured it could only be a very higher power giving me one last chance to straighten up my socially activist, politically charged, and herbally inspired, quintessentially 60s lifestyle. Most of my thinking by then had been formed by the fact that I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps, starting when I was 19, and I spent them in an abandoned northern Chile village with wonderful people who never gave in to poverty, never gave in to despair, and never expected anybody else to solve their problems. So when I returned at 21 to finish undergraduate at Berkeley, I was just in time for the free speech movement, civil rights demonstration, serious anti-war activity, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I even saw Janis Joplin on a regular basis. After graduation, and I did finally graduate, I made my living by creating my own job, funded by local foundations, that organized newly arrived immigrants from rural Central American countries. These are not even Spanish-speaking, native dialect folks, to cope with living in San Francisco and Oakland, California. That's a culture shock. I was therefore at home seeking social change through community activism, regular demonstrations. I was genetically impatient with bureaucracy and genetically suspicious of government. I certainly never thought about law school. I didn't even know women could be lawyers. I sure didn't know what lawyers did. So I went to law school out of fear of courting hubris. With so many people trying to get in, saying no just seemed arrogant, a thumbing of my nose to the good karma and to the $50 I won. So I went, totally naive and very hesitant. There are no lawyers in my family. At the beginning, it seemed to me that everybody else in my law school class was born attorneys. Their parents had read the Black's Law Dictionary while mine was reading Winnie the Pooh. And I still remember the moment in about November of my first year when I figured out why the professors kept writing pi and delta on the blackboard. It was pretty embarrassing when I said, "I got it!" And everyone looked at me and realized that I was the only one who hadn't gotten it. So for better or for worse, back then we didn't have grades at the end of the semester. I know you do, and you're probably still in shock. But we got one set of grades for the entire first year, and they came out in July, right after you'd paid tuition for the next year. So even if your grades suggested serious error not to go to dental school, you had to go forward because you'd already sent in your non-refundable check and you were pretty much stuck. It turned out that was the wisest thing because lo, these many centuries later, almost everybody in my law school class turned out to have used their law degree for the better, not just for their life, but for their communities, for others' lives. And they based their decision to go or stay not solely on grades, if they had, or if they'd based it on class standing, or whether they made law review, or whether they had a job lined up, then their communities would have lost wonderful contributors whose talents may have been less traditional, but turned out to be equally or even more effective. So let me suggest a different view of traditional law school reward systems, one that really works for the long haul, and clearly I've been in it for the long haul. Let me start by putting the 3 years you're here in a different context. What you're doing here is not practicing law. It bears little relationship to the practice. So if you don't like it much, or you didn't get all A's for the first time in your life, relax. Applying law is totally different than learning it. Skills that don't lend themselves easily to grades, things like working well with others, leadership talent, problem solving on the fly, a facility with technology, an entrepreneurial spirit. These are all vital to successful lawyering now more than ever, but they're not taught in law school. We're so fortunate at Syracuse to have great clinical teachers. You have the best intern and extern programs. The DC program knocks your socks off, and you have brilliant traditional scholars. Every excellent law school, and this is one, needs them all. They need to have lawyers who've dominated their areas of practice. They need clinical professors who know their subjects at every level. And they need scholars whose analysis and research move the ball forward on the intellectual playing fields. But if your thing isn't any of these traditional boxes, not to worry. In today's volatile legal market, boxes are in such constant flux that I think it's dangerous to even want to be in one for very long. Let me speak for a moment about the economics of law practice. There is a revolution happening out there, folks. The traditional model that was in place when I started, it's a model that I'll call big law. It's just no longer the standard, and it is certainly not the future. Big law relied on a highly limited number of owner lawyers who are supported by an army of non-owner lawyers who work for billable hours that were much higher than the non-owner salaries, and all done with limited accountability to clients for the ultimate cost. When you think about it, that model looks a little bit like a Ponzi scheme, and increasingly it is not tolerated by clients. Today's clients, and hence today's law providers, are not paying for mentoring or for work that exceeds the value of the project or for churning a file to exhaust every possible legal nuance. The Dewey-LaBeouf collapse in New York City may be extreme, and it is extreme, but it's also a cautionary tale of what no longer works for clients or for their lawyers. What does work for this new and smarter client is great news for all of you. The new client demands efficiency, assumes a higher level of technological fluency in their legal service providers, and demands transparency in the work and in the billing. These market pressures, which are not going to go away and cannot be controlled by the American Bar Association, mean that now clients, even the mega companies, are looking as much at price point as they are at a brand name. And that means that they will look at and they will hire smaller firms, sole practitioners, people with niche practices that are well run and that offer excellent work and service. I know this for a fact because that's what happened in my practice. Once I left the giant firms, I was in a couple of them, big senior partner, first woman on the compensation committee, first woman this, first woman that. If you want to be the first woman in something, just be older than dirt, okay? So when I left and started my own firm, I decided I would take everything that I didn't like about all the other firms and flip it. So everything about my firm was client-centric, including where the office was, what we wore, where we sat, what materials we bought. Client-centric. And it worked. I had 360 feedback from my clients. What we did was seamlessly inserted in my clients' own internal systems. I used interactive software that we developed with a firm out of India before anyone knew how ubiquitous it would become, and we never used billable hours. So from a little spot in Phoenix, Arizona, my law partner, Diane Deere, and I were able to represent, ultimately, the biggest tech companies in the country. We did all their U.S. work, and later we did all their global immigration work. We opened an office in Shanghai, and we opened an office in India. This all happened because we listened to our clients. We learned to understand their business, and we thought creatively about how to get them the legal services they needed, not the ones we wanted to give them, with as little interruption and as much compatibility as possible. And so we did grow from 10 people to 150 in just a few years, from $1 million to $20 million. No, I didn't get to keep it all. No, I have no money to give you. But we did it in part by leveraging non-lawyers to handle all but the true legal work. So I think we were intuitively ahead of our time because some of the innovations we piloted are now moving pretty quickly into the mainstream. In addition to a different law firm model, market changes have created whole new delivery systems. And these new law models use lawyers in low-cost areas to manage repetitive, high-volume legal work, such as document collection and review and form completion. Sometimes these outfits are called near sourcing. Firms such as Axiom and United Lex are among them. And they're increasingly being used by law firms and also by companies directly to get important but not strategic legal work done at a reasonable cost. It's widely thought, this shocks me, that Axiom will be the world's biggest provider of legal services by 2018, and it very carefully does not call itself a law firm. So you have globalization, you have deregulation, you have technology. And what they mean to you is they level the playing field significantly. You law students, I think, should be thinking about how you can take advantage of the new reality. Don't run from it. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. It's an exciting time to be a lawyer. And then I think it's always been an exciting time to be a lawyer. Your dean asked me to talk a little bit more about my own career and how I came to do the things that, looking back on it, made a difference. That reflection, of course we'd had a glass of wine, turned out to surprise me. I think my success And certainly my fun as a lawyer turns on three things. They apply equally to the old law firm model and the new ones. They transcend market fluctuations, and I'm going to give them to you. The three keys that worked for me. The first is find your passion. At its essence, law is simply the regulating of human behavior and action. And within that enormous definition, every one of you can find something that moves you deeply. For me, it turned out to be immigration. I did spend a few years in a big firm doing the mainstream stuff, some environmental work, some litigation, some trial work, a lot of employment law, and I'm grateful for that time. But it turns out that I am deeply committed to the morality of inclusion, and that is the heart of immigration law. I like its constructive premise: build bridges across political, social, religious, and national boundaries. And because I believe in it so deeply, the second essential ingredient for my career, my success in career, flowed very naturally. Because the second ingredient is take risks. We all have little fortune cookie phrases that we rely on because they're short and they speak to us. One of mine is, what would I do if I weren't afraid? For me, that reminder to be bold let me represent clients in impossible cases. Let me leave big partner positions in big fancy law firms that offered way too much money in exchange for small ones that were doing work I loved, and ultimately it let me set up my own firm. And it let me speak truth to power, probably more often than anyone would recommend, especially if you take a presidential appointment in Washington, D.C. But speaking truth to power is not a big deal when it comes out of where you really live, what you really believe in, and that it isn't about you. It's about those clients, those people you represent. For me, it was about the 11 million people who are here without documentation and whose lives I felt I carried with me to Washington. So to be quiet in the face of indifference to their plight, that would have been an act of some kind of courage. I didn't have that kind of courage. I only had the kind of courage that said, this isn't about you, baby. This is about 11 million people who need your voice. The third ingredient is the most important. Live your integrity. If you can't be trusted, if people don't think you are always honest, don't bother getting a law license. Your reputation is worth so much more than any short-term result that might come from cutting a little corner. And there is no such thing, here's another promise to you, as a great or as a successful, dishonest lawyer. So what about all of you? I promise you that you won't know for many years who in this class will be extraordinary, who will achieve greatness. And I'll even bet you my old $50 that whoever it is will surprise you, because their common thread will not be grades, but rather passion for what they believe, their willingness to take risks in the cause of justice, and their absolute adherence to honest lawyering. They will excel because they're committed to something they find bigger and more important than themselves, something that transcends gold stars on report cards or big bucks in a paycheck. I realize that today I've given you a talk that has a lot of anecdotes and a lot of generalities. I hope it's given you a little bit of food for thought, and a little bit of food for conversation, but I know you also like to have some concrete advice, and I have that. I'm going to leave you with 3 things to do. They're deceptively easy, but they will reap long-term rewards, and you can even write them down. First thing, start looking right now in law school for the passion that will bring out the best in you as a law student, as a lawyer, and as a person. This law school is full of incredible opportunities to identify, explore, and perfect your particular talents. Finding your interest is the best way to avoid letting yourself get drawn into the impossible goal of living other people's notions of what matters. And I urge you, go about this systematically, the way a lawyer would. Make a list of what you like. See a professional to identify what really motivates you. Check off the experiences in your life so far that have moved you, and sample from the buffet of opportunity that Syracuse offers. That's your first to do. Here's your second one. There are almost 200 people in your class, and I know, if I do, you and you and you, I know you don't know enough of them. You are in a collegial profession in which finding a job, doing it well, continuing to learn about it for the next, 40 years, all turn on connections. And yet you aren't connecting with people who have those same goals and are literally sitting next to you. So my challenge is for you to change that. Remember what I said about taking a risk? So here's a big risk. This is worse than Match.com. I want you to look around, not the person sitting next to you, but look around and make yourself go meet 5 new 1L students in the next 5 school days, and then do 5 more after that. Then cultivate those friendships. I promise that doing that will expand and brighten your time here. It will expand and brighten your whole career. And I promise that this exercise will give you remarkable confidence. A little rejection, good for everybody. A little acceptance, great for everybody. It'll make you a wiser and a happier lawyer. And I'm not kidding about doing it. So make a note. You all have someone that you've said, that guy's such a jerk. Why does he always have his hand up? And someone else that you think, I wonder what's going on with that. He hasn't said one word the whole year. Those are the people you want to go seek out, because you're going to be surprised at what you find out. This is my third and last to do. You have to write your own definition of success. You can't take my definition. Ask yourself, what do you want your life to be like in 5 years or 10? Where do you want to be spending your time? What role do you want money to play in your life, and why? What is your relationship to money? Boy, that's a big question. What role do you want friends and family to play, and why? Why'd you come here in the first place? Probably already half forgotten. What adjectives do you want colleagues to use when they describe you in half a decade or 40 years from now? Those answers will define success for you. And when you measure success by using that internal, intimate compass that you set based on your values, then you have the start of 3 lifetime gifts. Nobody can take them away, and they'll bring you great guidance, and I promise they'll bring you great success. First, you'll always be able to find your own true north, the place that puts you exactly right, in balance, in your own world. I can't tell you how important it was to me that I went to Washington, D.C. at a time in my life where I knew exactly who I was. I knew exactly why I was going there, and I knew exactly when I was off my compass. Second, you'll be able to determine your own passions, including the things about law that speak to you, things that brought you here in the first place, and things that should be strong enough to keep you here and carry you through a long and interesting career. And third, owning your own definition of success means you can change it when your own experience and your own wisdom gained from that experience tell you time to make a course correction. Being able to embrace change is important to staying vital, to staying alive in the practice. But the danger is you start listening to everyone else's voice, and then you can't hear your own. So your choices and your changes need to reflect your soul and your dreams. So here you are. You are Baptist in the rigors of the very first part of the legal business. So for heaven's sakes, don't give up. There's life after law school, I promise, and it's good. And in this law school, filled with professors and staff and deans who really care, there's darn good life in law school, too. So I say we all just take a big collective breath, find your true north, recover your sense of humor. Remember when you had one? And enjoy the ride. I say, right now, starting today, on a Thursday afternoon, that suggests even upstate New York might actually have a spring, You give yourself permission to enjoy the wonderful ride you're on. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. You can't ask anything that I won't answer, and you can't ask anything that's stupid. I've asked every stupid question in the world, so have at it. Don't be shy. I know the people in back, you want to run. Brave guy. Yeah. You know, first of all, nobody's practice ready when they leave law school. Dear God in heaven, that's just not, it's not possible to be practice ready. What you can be is be market ready, and I think that's a very different thing. If you ask me for very specific ideas, I think make sure that you structure your time here so you get to explore classes that you think you might really be interested in, but you're not 100% sure. Do that, because that's where you're going to find the ignition for your engine. It's probably, if it's tax law, lucky you. But if it isn't, then you're going to have to search a little bit. Take advantage of the clinics and the volunteer opportunities that are here, because if you're not a traditional law school learner and you don't think, oh God, great, another 200 pages of case law to read, I can hardly wait. If that doesn't turn you on, what you'll find is if you actually meet a human being that needs your help, that's kind of wonderful, and you'll learn faster, and you'll start to see yourself unfolding as an actual lawyer, if you will. I think it's very important that you know enough about business to do two things: be able to run one and be able to know what you don't know. When I say run a business, some of you may end up leaving law school and hanging out a shingle. God bless you, terrifying idea, but it may not be an option to do anything else. In which case, you've got to know the basics. How do you get a lease? How do you get insurance? What does a balance sheet mean? What's the trust account rules? How do you set up a bank account? Where do you get a retainer letter? Those things are really important, and your state bar is free, and it will give you enormous amounts of material and guidance for all of that. If you're in a situation where you really think, you know, I may just kind of be out there on my own, right now, go around wherever you're going to be. I know most of you are not from Syracuse and not from New York. Go back to wherever you think you're going to end up practicing law and cultivate a relationship with a couple of lawyers. This is what I mean by taking a risk. You know, it's not a big risk. What would I do if I weren't afraid? Well, heck, call them up. I get calls from young lawyers. I mentor 10 lawyers. I never do more, I never do less. 10 lawyers. I see them once a month. I talk to them more often. I'm flattered that they give a darn and think I might have something to give. For the most part, if you call somebody in your hometown or home city and say, hi, I'm Joe, I'm a second year at Syracuse, I wonder if I could buy you lunch or coffee. You can only afford coffee, by the way. Buy you coffee, and you just talk to me a little bit about law. Do your homework. Approach it like a lawyer. There's no timeouts here. So if you do that, you better have something you want to ask them and something you want to get from that relationship, even if it's just an hour. But I'd recommend you do that. The more you can put yourself into the systems, make those connections, the better off you are. And nothing's permanent. I don't know anybody who's still in the same job that they started with. It'd be kind of tragic, in my opinion. So don't worry about change. That help? Okay. Looks like that was a comprehensive question. Yeah.
Okay, so in the 2012 election, immigration wasn't really the headline of what Governor Romney and President Obama were really debating about. But my question for you is, what direction do you think that the immigration law should be handled towards illegal immigrants, especially when you have a president who has deported more illegal immigrants than his predecessors, and when you have this so-called war on drugs going on near the border?
Yeah, well, that's why I left, you know. What do I think about the current immigration law? It's a disaster and terrible. Current immigration policy, if possible, it's worse. You're right, of course, we deported more people under the Obama administration than we have in all the other presidents combined. And this from someone who said he was against it. You're always going to have deportation, by the way, so I'm not saying that that isn't a function of an immigration law by a sovereignty, it is, but where you put your priorities is, of course, critical. The trouble with our immigration law and policy is it's so retro. I feel like we're sort of like Putin running back to the late 17th century, and here we are pretending that we aren't a globalized world, pretending that we can survive as a nation and an economy without the input of immigrants at every level. Demography is where I end up. I don't go with the morality, the compassion, the how could you, all that, nobody cares. But demography is a fact, and economics are a fact, and security is a fact. The worst thing you can do as a nation is have 11 plus million people and you don't know who they are or where they are. We were pretty excited about the few people at 9/11 we weren't sure about. But to say, yeah, we just have this huge group of people and don't ask me, I don't really know where they are. So you have to find a way from a security perspective, from the most right-wing place you want to start, to say, well, how are we going to get that information into our systems? And the only way you can do that is if people are not going to come forward on their own unless you give them an incentive. So if you give an incentive, then they come forward, they register, and you can start to make intelligent choices. That's all that happened with the DACA program. It wasn't enough, and it wasn't bold enough and all that, but it's really what happened. So I say from a security perspective, we have missed the boat. From an economic perspective, of course, we can ill afford not to include everyone who wants to come here and build something good. We can do the list of tech companies and non-tech companies that are started by immigrants, they're the children of immigrants, and it's basically all of them, to be honest with you. But it's not just that. Our universities, every institution flourishes from the cross-pollination of ideas and people and races. And God forbid we even start talking about what would happen to America's cuisine if we got rid of all the immigrants. We'd all just be sitting around with a bunch of mashed potatoes in our hands. You know? So there's that. And the last thing I think is security and economics, and then demography. We are a dying nation without immigration. All of Western Europe is a dying nation. And you don't change your demographics. It takes almost 100 years to change the birth rate of a country. I'm not kidding. In order to change whether or not it's a vital place. Immigration is what has kept us vital. If you don't have that, then you don't have the native-born, indigenous, non-Native Americans. Only in America could I make that comment. You don't have them producing enough children in order to do more than barely replace themselves, and not even that. So immigration and the demographics of immigration are critical to the health of a nation. That's the way it is. Those are the facts. I forgot the rest of what you asked, but you can tell where I sort of feel about this. Do I think it's going to happen? No, I don't. I'm kind of glad, because whatever would come out of this Congress is frightening to me. For every benefit, there's like 2 hard socks to the nose. And I don't think that's healthy for the country. Do I think it's tragic that we haven't found a way to include 11 million people, the majority of whom, I'm talking more than 70%, have been here more than 10 years. More than 10 years. And 80% of whom are in blended families where there are U.S. citizens and permanent residents involved. So, we owe them something, but we'll leave that to another time and another Congress and maybe another president. No other questions? No questions about women and the law? Oh, there's a woman in and the law.
Sorry. So currently in a legal profession where everything is dictated by GPAs and minimum grades, how do we convince employers that we don't fit within that box and that we have other assets that are a lot better than what our current grades are?
It's a great question, and it's really kind of what I was hoping you'd get out of the speech. You're not going to convince them by talking to them. And if they are places that are only hiring at a certain level, I wouldn't waste my time with them, because it's not what you're all about. You know, look at it this way. If you go to one of those firms, you talk yourself in the door, the work you do is exactly the work you didn't really like doing in law school. I mean, it's pretty similar. It's highly structured, has a lot of people looking it over, a lot of judging and grading going on. I don't know you, but I'd be surprised if that is you. So you want to find a place that feels like home, you know, that feels, this is my wheelhouse. This is where I really shine. And again, I don't know you, but if you're a people person, you want to get into a kind of law where those skills are what advance you. It's natural then. You don't have to get up every day and be somebody else, because believe me, it is so exhausting to practice law. If you have to practice law as somebody else, yeah, you'll be gone. You'll be a goner. So the answer to your question is, you take the classes that interest you when you're allowed to. You watch what happens to those grades, get good ones there. And those are the things that you want to take and say to whatever, the family law practitioner, the this practitioner, and say, this is what I can do when I'm in love with what I do, and I'm in love with this. The other thing is, learn to write. If you don't know how to write well, I'm begging you, as a member of your own profession, please go learn. Because contrary to popular belief, judges do not tweet you. They do not get online with you. They want to read what you have written. And if it isn't good and compelling, then I don't care whether you have a 4.9, it's not going to advance you. Everybody who's a lawyer needs to know how to write coherently, cogently, and with, later on, a little bit of style so people don't fall asleep on page 1. Yeah?
You mentioned about immigrants who come to the United States, starting businesses, and pushing back. To what extent do you feel that immigrants or children of immigrants here in the United States can connect with those other immigrant communities that they relate to in terms of providing them services and advancing their economic interests? And how do you suggest the children of immigrants go about that?
Boy, that's tough. When I set up when I graduated from Berkeley undergraduate, you know, I was pretty much unhireable, to your point, you know. And so I set up my own little program and got money to fund it. And what it did is match new arrival immigrants with U.S. teenagers who were first and second generation immigrants. So you have to, none of you are old enough to appreciate this, but this was insanity. I had people from rural Nicaragua who spoke no Spanish working with Brown Berets and Black Panthers from Oakland, California. People didn't really think that was going to work, but it did, because what you have to offer as a first or second generation immigrant is how it works. That's what you have to offer to the new arrival family, and nobody does that. So with a great deal of tolerance and respect for where they came from, and with a great deal of understanding of where you are, what they need to know is kind of a simultaneous cultural translator. So my kids, I can say this after 40 years, one of the things that they did is they would teach people how to hotwire a payphone. No one even knows what a payphone is, but nobody had any money. And they'd teach them how to get on and off a city bus. And they'd teach them how to walk down a crowded street in San Francisco when you don't know when you make eye contact and when you don't. Weird stuff like that, but it really makes the difference as to how quickly you can feel like you're a little bit belonging here. So my answer to your question is, I think it's a responsibility of people who are here now that came from somewhere else to turn around and reach back and give a hand up. And you do that by listening and watching and then very carefully meeting them where they are. And thank you for your question, and I'd like to know you. Sounds like a great guy. Yeah. Anybody else? I see another woman's hand. My law school class, we had less than 10% of my class was women. We were all a little bit older. We were all married because that way we weren't dangerous, So crazy. Yeah.
Despite the fact that over the past several decades there have been a lot of strides for women in the legal field, by and large, a lot of the upper executives are still men. So do you have any suggestions for women who want to go into the field on how to sort of handle the inherent sexism that is in the legal profession?
Okay. Sure. I think any woman my age does. It's kind of a miracle and wonderful that there are so many women in the profession, but it's still not your profession at all. I mean, the models that I talked about, those are boy models, and they worked really well, but only for boys for a long, long time, men, if you will. Nothing changed enough, even though we've had a lot of women in the profession for a number of decades. They didn't move up the ranks. There was reams of articles and stuff about why more women aren't senior partners. I think it's because women are very sensible. And I think that they figured out right away, this is really not a very good life. It might be a good life if all you want is a lot of money, but rare is the top-seated lawyer who says, every day I love my life. Every day I'm excited to go to work. I'm being very pejorative here, but I think I'm also being very honest because I know a lot of those people. For a woman in the law, you got a bigger balancing act. Most of us still are the only ones who bear children, and you need to be thinking about that. You probably are more relation-oriented than not. It might be that, and again, I'm speaking in terms of glittering generalities, but all of that drives women to look for alternatives to that classic model. Now that the classic model is kind of going away, I think women are really ahead of the curve, frankly, in their profession. And that's really a good thing. I think men are starting to understand, especially these younger generations, and I'm speaking to all of you guys here too, that you really have to balance your life a little bit better than just saying, I'm going to go in, clock in 2010, and I'm going to clock out in like 2060. And along the way, I guess I'll have a family, but I won't really know it because I won't get to see much of them. That's not healthy for anybody, men or women. So I think just as the market's changing, the millennials are coming in and saying, I really don't want the gold watch at the end of this predictable lockstep career. I want to be able to do a lot of different things. So I think women have been there for a while. They've been repudiated for it as though we were losers for not wanting to climb the ladder. But in truth, I know a lot more women lawyers who are really happy doing quite untraditional things, working out of their home, working 3 days a week, forming a partnership with 2 other women, and so that everybody just works a few days a week while they take care of kids. And then they can insert themselves more and more as life goes on. A model for that is Sandra Day O'Connor, Justice O'Connor, by the way, whom Hannah and I know very well. She didn't even start practicing law till her 3 kids were in kindergarten, and she's done okay. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you for your questions. I always learn, and I'm always excited to talk to law students. I just want you to realize once more, this is your time. This is not a dark time. This is a very bright time because almost everything is up for grabs. You get to design it. So go have a great time and have a great career. Thank you again.